Good evening. I'm PJ O'Neill, serving as branch chief in STEM training in youth programs. And welcome to this month's Tech Talk. Good Mate, charting a course to clean water. Tech Talks are sponsored by the U.S. Coast Guard, the Coast Guard Auxiliary, and Scouting America's Sea Scout program. Next month's Tech Talk will be held on the third Tuesday. Now, usually they're on the fourth Tuesday, but considering the Thanksgiving holiday in November, we will host our Tech Talk on the third Tuesday, November 18th, still at 2100 hours or 9 p.m. Eastern. November's topic will be leadership, Scouting's own program, NAIL, otherwise known as the National Advanced Youth Leadership Experience, an exciting program that enhances leadership skills and expands upon team building and ethical decision-making. Just a reminder that this Tech Talk is being recorded and will be posted on the Sea Scout and Aux Scout YouTube channels. If you have not done so, please subscribe to either of the YouTube channels and share it with your shipmates that could not join in tonight. The recorded Tech Talks are excellent training for your Sea Scout ship or auxiliary flotilla. So please take advantage of the free on-demand training. Like and subscribe to either the Aux Scout or Sea Scout YouTube channel and take advantage of that high quality training. If you have any questions during the presentation tonight, please enter them into the Q&A chat function or the Q&A box down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Now, normally I would hand it off to the subject matter expert after a brief introduction and biography, but it just so happens that tonight I am your subject matter expert. So as my screen's loading, I'm not going to go into a long biography. I've been introducing the Tech Talks for a while. The Good Mate program is a course that I used to teach in the auxiliary, the Coast Guard Auxiliary. And it's been a while since I've taught the course, and I tried to reformat it for a Tech Talk and to make it more applicable, especially to our Sea Scouts that are viewing this Tech Talk tonight. I just inserted a picture here of the actual Good Mate manual. I believe it's about 79 pages. So I tried to take out the information that is most applicable to our mission as auxiliaries and as Sea Scouts and condense it into an interesting but educational program with some good takeaways. So I hope that it's a good program that you can take back to your ship or flotilla and put some of these tips that we'll talk about tonight into action. Now, the whole manual itself is divided into these units. We've got the water environment, oil and fuel, sewage and pollution, vessel maintenance, repair, marine debris, storm water runoff, and vessel operation damage. So what I've done is I've tried to, in this shortened course, touch on each of the units, but some of them I will spend more time and give more information and more practical tips on than others. And I wanted to start off with making a link to the Sea Scout program and the idea behind the Good Mate. The Good Mate program, even though I presented it and trained other auxiliaries on it, and I was trained myself at first, it is a program put out by the Ocean Conservancy. They have a wonderful website and highly interactive. So I would encourage you to check out the Ocean Conservancy's website for more information than just the Good Mate, which we'll cover tonight. But there is a strong alignment between the values of scouting and the mission of the Good Mate program, particularly for Sea Scouts. The Good Mate also connects with 3 of the 11 statutory missions of the U.S. Coast Guard. So it's a way to also support the Coast Guard. And as a Coast Guard auxiliaries, that's part of what we do, is to support the United States Coast Guard in all missions except law enforcement. And here are the 3 of the 11 missions that the information of the Good Mate supports. It's what we do with the information that will help support the Coast Guard by protecting our living marine resources, by protecting the environment. And marine safety, which is a large field, but mostly for this course, will deal with protection of property. And we'll see what that's all about a little bit later. So really simply, there's these three anchor points of the Good Mate program. It's the role as us, we the boaters, the impact that our simple actions and small decisions can have, and then taking it out to the boating community at large, taking what we learn, putting it into action, and passing along the education and good practices that we'll talk about this evening. And the main purpose here is to increase in awareness of our actions on and off the water to be a good steward to the environment. Things that are very obvious and some things that won't be obvious, such as some of the chemicals that we can introduce into the environment, like oil, or debris, like our refuse, our trash, our garbage. And the other purpose that we'll get to at the end is really to build cooperation amongst all of us mariners. And so some basic facts to just think about. The earth is covering, water is covering 70% of the earth. So it's the largest part of planet Earth. And as boaters, we all enjoy this natural resource. And we boat in many different environments, in many different types of vessels, from canoes and kayaks to sailing vessels to motorboats and all sorts of other craft. Some of us enjoy the ocean. Some are in estuaries, as where I came from in the Chesapeake Bay, where the fresh water and the salt water meet. Some are in rivers, and some Sea Scout ships are inland towards lakes. And so each of these environments has its own special, unique characteristics. But the things that we'll learn about and talk about tonight in the Good Mate program will apply no matter where you're located. So part of responsible boating, of course, is we are utilizing a natural resource that is also home to plant life, to microscopic life, and to much larger sea life that we are all used to seeing. And so we have to think about, how do our actions impact water quality? And we'll see ways that not just very obviously saying throwing trash into the water or spilling oil as we're working on an engine, how that could impact the water quality and marine environment, but things that we might not think of, like improper boating and not following safe boating procedures. We'll explore a little bit more tonight about specific threats to the wildlife. And again, emphasize how responsible boating can ensure not only our safety and those that are also on the water, but also the safety of marine life. So of course we run into these really jarring images of wildlife sometimes that are caught in some sort of net, some sort of rope, or entangled in plastic. Right. And the example here is the seal caught in a type of netting, and we'll talk about where that netting comes from and how that's preventable. And part of the mission to guard our living marine resources. So some common things that might come to mind, especially if you operate a boat or ride on a boat, or your crew on a boat that has an engine, whether it's an inboard, whether it's an outboard, is fuel. This is one of the top sources of contamination in the environment. Fuel spills are really common. Now, fuel spills could be huge, but some of the fuel spills that can be most damaging are actually the smaller fuel spills. Often marine fuel is is dispensed at the dock, it's dockside. And it's those little drops that when we don't take care in filling our engine, whether it's direct fill or we're filling a gas can for a smaller engine, those little drops will add up cumulatively if we have hundreds or thousands of boaters that aren't attentive when they are fueling their vessel. Now, there are ways to ensure that none of your fuel is going to drop into the marine environment. And one of the most simplest ways is to carry a rag. And most marinas will have a place for soiled rags, particularly if they are collecting oil or other types of lubricant or chemicals or gasoline or diesel marine fuel, right? These aren't, if it's dirty with those types of chemicals or agents, you certainly don't want to be carrying it around with you. But what it does, it catches any spillage, any drops from the nozzle. And if your marina doesn't have a facility where those used rags can go, that would be a great project to talk to the marina to figure out how you could start some sort of rag collection program at that marina. But if they don't, you can safely store them in a plastic bucket, in a bag, and then find a location that does accept that kind of garbage. Here's an interesting fact, I think. So I have a quart of oil, right? Or it represents a quart of oil up at the top of the screen. I kind of blotted out the actual gasoline can. That's roughly the size of a normal quart of oil. When entering into the marine environment, that quart of oil creates an oil slick. And I know many of you understand the concept of oil and water don't mix, right? They keep separate. And oil is going to create, particularly a type of motor oil, will create a sheen on the water surface. And so we see, those metallic rainbow colors across the water there. That's what an oil sheen looks like if you've never seen one, but I'm sure you've even seen them in parking lots after a rainstorm. But we're talking about oil. It could be on the ocean, it could be in a bay, it could be on a river, a stream, or in a lake. It could be very small or it could be large. But that oil is damaging hydrocarbons. And once entered into the marine environment, becomes toxic to the environment. But here's the interesting fact. 1 quart of oil can create a sheen the size of 2 football fields. So think about that. I kind of opened up this section of the Good Mate talking about what seems like a very small type of pollution. A few drops of gasoline, which is different than oil, but the concept still applies. These small accidents actually can create a large area of damage, or at least a large area that's negatively affected, negatively impacted. And so that goes back to sometimes the small things add up to really big things. And I think this is a wonderful example of a small quart bottle of oil is capable of creating a 2 football field size oil sheen. And it's going to affect any of the marine life in the area, down to the microscopic. Some of those phytoplankton that are so vital to the ecosystem will die off because the sheen is going to block out the sun for photosynthesis. And I'm not going to go into the food chain in this in this presentation. But if you go from the microscopic to the small plants to the small fish, right, those hydrocarbons kill off the food source, or they're ingested by smaller organisms and eaten by larger organisms. So those chemicals, those agents don't fully disappear for a long, long time. So there was a statistic I had read, or kind of a fact that I had read, and the fact was that annually across the world, so across the whole globe, that small human accidents each year are about 30 times as impactful as one of the largest oil spills, commercial oil spills, in modern history. That oil spill is the Exxon Valdez oil spill. This happened quite a while ago, and for the Sea Scout audience, you probably were not around for this, but at the time, this was a major disaster. It was an environmental nightmare, and it took a very long time to try and clean the environment. We see the sheen caused by the Exxon Valdez, a photo from National Geographic there, and then two pictures representing cleanup workers. And you can see the boots in the oil, and you can see the cleanup crew trying to scrub with, power washers to scrub the oil. And then we see one of those jarring pictures of wildlife, of one of the whales that was negatively affected by the oil sheen. Now, the Exxon Valdez released 11 million gallons of oil in that spill. It's a lot more than the Court, right? So it was a huge oil spill. But again, the fact is, on average, each year, smaller human accidents cumulatively cause about 30 times the amount of oil released into the marine environment than this awful oil spill. If you've ever seen images of an oil spill, a very common image is one of the birds, right? And here's the big thing about birds. The birds will likely be alive. The oil is not going to kill them. But what ends up happening is once the bird is coated in oil, they can't fly anymore, right? And if you know anything about birds, they have to be dry to fly, and that's why ducks and geese, their feathers are naturally oiled themselves, and water rolls off of their back during rainstorms, and they fly very well. Other birds, like cormorants, don't have the self-oiling feathers, and they stand up when they're wet with their wings out, kind of like this, and they turn to dry off. Right? The birds have to be able to fly, but once they're covered in oil, they're not going to be able to fly. They're not going to be able to go back to their nesting areas. They're not going to be able to effectively reproduce, and they're not going to effectively be able to eat. So this is an image of, a glob of oil from an oil spill, and a wildlife rescue expert trying to rescue this bird. And we can see in the background here a boom, right? Many of you may be familiar with the boom, but if you're not, they're made of different materials. Some are floating, but the boom will sit at the surface of the water and collect the oil from the oil sheen. There is kind of an interesting fact here. We know that if you've ever had to do dishes, that many dish soaps are very good at removing oil or grease from our cooking dishes and our utensils. But in the marine environment, you actually don't want to use dish soap, because you want to try to guide the sheen towards those booms where oil can be collected. Dish soap will actually disperse the oil and then make it sink. And then it is really lodged in the marine environment, and it's going to cause damage further into the ecosystem. So you actually don't want to use dish soap in a cleanup effort. Now, you may not be going out to clean up an oil spill anytime soon, but some of you may be in that kind of career field in the future. And so that's something to keep in mind about this, the science of this, that the dish soap is going to disperse the oil and actually cause it to sink. But dish soap does have its place in wildlife rescue. I took these photos both from the Dawn Dish Soap Company, and they quite famously advertised ducks, with their dish soap. You even see the promotion here. You buy 3 Dawn dish soaps and you get that beautiful little mallard there, little stuffed duck. So it is true that um, for oiled birds, that something like Dawn dish soap will help get that oil off the bird and it will drop into a basin. But the key here is that the wildlife experts are not trying to disperse the oil spill in the water with the dish soap. They're going to be using this in a controlled environment where that wastewater can be safely collected for treatment. Something to mention that there is a nickname that is not always well liked by Coast Guardsmen and Coast Guard women that are in marine safety and do help with oil cleanups. The nickname is duck scrubbers. So while we may not be going out to clean up these oil spills on our own, it does fall on us for prevention. So this is where it goes back to these mindful practices, particularly when we're working on marine engines, when we're dealing with our bilges, right? We want to make sure that we have the proper materials to collect up any type of chemical waste and a place to properly dispose them. There are spill kits readily available. I'm not endorsing any one brand, and there are many more companies out there that make spill kits, but these are really good to have on a vessel. Right? The examples that I have here are Spill Max that comes in the bucket, or Clear Spill, which is a little bit smaller and more transportable. And these kind of kits are going to come with rubber gloves, with pads, with absorbent materials, and it's depending what type of vessel you have and what type of work you might be doing in the bilge. Um, you would want to ask for some advice. What's the best size and type of spill kit that you should carry? It's not a legal requirement like life preservers or fire extinguishers on certain vessels, um, but it's a responsible decision. Now, sewage pollution, I'm not going to spend too much time on in the Good Mate program for this evening. There's a lot more information in the full Good Mate course. But I think we kind of have the basic idea of sewage, human waste from boats and marinas. And that can range from small compostable plastic toilets to fully functioning heads below deck. And so the important part here is just to remember um, that we're not discharging into the natural environment, whether that's emptying a small approved container or actually discharging from the valve into the marine environment. Of course, one of the big risks with this type of pollution is the bacteria that can become an overgrowth in that particular environment. Not quite on the boating front, but often in rainstorms, there are some wastewater treatment plants that will overflow. And water quality warnings will go out to fishermen and to swimmers and to boaters about the bacteria count. Because if there's an overflow, the sewage is leaking from the plant into the natural environment, and it's going to create bacteria problems and human pathogens. If you have been on a boat or you sail a boat or crew a boat that does have a head with a collection tank, you're probably familiar with this site, a pump out station that is at the marina. So again, this is something that you should be trained on and just be vigilant so that if you're ever in charge of this, that you're doing it properly. Many marinas have staff that will service the boats, so trained, qualified staff. I have even seen mobile pump out units that will travel on a barge from boat to boat and offer pump outs while boats are moored. The more in-depth Good Mate course will talk about different types of marine sanitation devices and the actual legal definitions of no discharge zones and what types of vessels applies to, and give nautical miles for different discharge um, allowances. But for this type of course and the type of probably recreational boater um, that this would apply to, I think that uh, that's a that's a little bit too much information. But if you are interested in finding out more, just know there are different types of marine sanitation devices. Certain types and sizes of vessel are required to have certain types of sanitation devices, and those no discharge zones that are written into law very well might apply. A good rule of a good rule to follow is if you're at the marina, use the onshore bathrooms because that's going to go into an approved septic system. Now, a topic that would apply to really any of us that work on our own boats, or we take care of boats, or we volunteer to help others maintain boats. Um, there's a lot of boat work that's done on land. And so being a good steward as a boater doesn't just apply to what we do on water or what we do directly on shoreside. It can apply working on a boat at a marina, at your own home, or even in a shop. So we do have to realize that um, while we work on boats, we should wear, and we often do, wear appropriate PPE, personal protective equipment, right? Whether that's a suit like a Tyvek, a mask or a respirator, depending what you're doing, goggles, gloves, right? That's kind of basic. We have this instinct and we have the education and knowledge to know that we should protect ourselves. But if we're protecting ourselves, that should tell us that some of the chemicals that we're using or that we're taking off of a boat, especially if we're sanding, are also not good for the environment. And so we need to be aware of where the dust and where the particles are going to. Again, if you're using any type of liquids like the anti-fouling paints, right? You're going to paint over the hull. Spills are always a concern. So one of the most common preventative measures, whether it's for spills or to collect the particles or dust from our boat work, is to work on a tarp. And I have a picture here from a marina. It's called Sioux Creek Marina, just outside Baltimore, Maryland. And you can see this work area doesn't have a boat on it right now, but it's tarps down. It's very close to the water, and the tarps are rolled up at the edges. It's like an encatchment, right? So this is supposed to not only catch particles, say if we're sanding, but it can catch drips and spills, and the tarps can be rolled up when they're done and either properly disposed of or shaken out and cleaned. Other things to consider, and it's not absolutely necessary, but a good idea, especially if you're doing sanding, is to think about using a vacuum sander. And if you don't have one, maybe finding someone that does that you could borrow. And it's a simple concept. It's the vacuum hose attached to the sander, and that's going to pull the dust into a bag or a bin as you're working. So all those particles are collected and then they can be disposed of. And that's a sure way. You should still work on a tarp, but that's a much more sure way to ensure that any of those particles that are being sanded off the boat aren't going to accumulate in the area of the marina. This particular marina is on a small creek. So while it is tidal and while the water is not stagnant, it does move. These types of particles are going to, of course, they can disperse in the tide and the current, but many are going to sink, and so the area can become polluted over time. Again, it's those small actions that will add up to large actions over a large period of time. Marine debris. This can be a lot of things. We could just say trash, garbage, but debris is a better fitting term because it could be fishing gear. It could be cigarette butts. It could be tires, right? So there's all sorts of marine debris. So there are two kinds of marine debris pollution. This will apply to liquids like oils and chemicals as well. And one we call point source. And I like to think of it this way. I can point to the source of the pollution. So this is when someone is on a boat and we'll just say it's an accident. The wind is going, say nice light breeze, 8 knots, and a piece of trash from your afternoon snack accidentally blows into the water. Well, that's a point source pollution. That piece of garbage ended up in the water, and we know right where it came from. It happened while you were on the water. But then there's non-point pollution, non-point source pollution. And I like to think of it in the same way. I can't point to the exact source, but I see the trash, or I see the garbage, or I see the debris in the water. Where did it come from? Now, some of you may have been to an area, particularly shoreside, and seen large collections of plastic bottles and bags floating. And it's easy to think that, man, a lot of people must throw their trash into the water. But very likely, that is non-point source debris. It was probably actions on land that led to the pollution of that marine environment. The first example here is really common sense, right? We don't throw things overboard. The second thing is recover lost items. So if I go back to this example of there was a light breeze and some of our bags from our afternoon snack accidentally blew overboard because we weren't paying attention. We did not put them in a trash can or receptacle with a lid. We try to recover that. But there are things that are not so obvious. Some of those things might be a lost anchor. Many people carry a spare anchor and they may decide, the line went afoul and they're just going to leave it because they have a second anchor that they can safely tie on. And now that anchor becomes part of the marine environment. Other things, fishing gear. This can apply to commercial fishermen, but it certainly can apply to recreational fishermen as well. It could be fishing line. Many anglers, myself included, we might get a bird's nest in the reel, or we're changing out our lures. And in any of those scenarios, you're going to have to pull off your fishing line, whether it's braided or it's mono, and you have to cut it. And fishing line can blow everywhere if you're not very careful. Those plastics are a really harmful introduction into the environment. They're often eaten or get tangled up in wildlife. Something that if you do fish, you might see near docks are PVC pipes. And they might have a little sticker or label on it that it's the PVC pipe is closed at the bottom, capped off at the bottom, and open at the top with an elbow. And that's a place for fishermen shoreside or after docking the boat to deposit scrap fishing line. I've also seen youth take on this idea as a project for a park that has a fishing area or a fishing pier, and there is no such receptacle. Getting the proper permissions to construct one of these types of receptacles with a plan for collection and disposal. And then there are other things in areas where people set traps for crabs, traps for lobsters. Often traps are set, there's a line with a float, and the fisherman will come back at a later time to pull the trap up. And sometimes something happens to that line, and the buoy floats away, the line sinks, and the trap is down at the bottom. These are called, it's called ghost gear. They can be called ghost traps, but we call that ghost gear. And there's a lot more of ghost gear sitting on the bottom of saltwater bodies of water and estuaries than we might imagine. There are actual nonprofit groups and companies that search for ghost gear and pull it out of the water. You might see one of these old types of traps or an old anchor, and it looks like it's got some sea life growing on it. Maybe some barnacles, maybe some mussels have attached, some kind of aquatic plant life. And it's easy to think, well, this is just adding to the natural environment. But the reality is, particularly if it's a trap, like a lobster pot or a crab trap, that wildlife is swimming in and not getting out. And that trap can be down there for years until it falls apart. So it is a danger to the marine wildlife environment. So I briefly talked about the point source pollution that you could point to and the non-point source. So a non-point source is typically the product of a rainstorm that causes runoff. And any type of debris and trash that gets caught in the water could be directly washed into a small creek or into a river and will float through that system into the larger body of water at some point. They could get caught in the marshes. That rainwater also washes chemicals down, any sitting oil, antifreeze, brake fluid on pavement. The water is going to push that into a storm drain, and many storm drains, kind of like this picture, empty into an area without water being treated. Right? It's just to keep the water off of the paved surfaces to prevent flooding. And many storm drains will directly empty into the ecosystem. That's a way that, as boaters and mariners who care about the natural resource, can think about, what do our actions and the actions of my community, even far from the water, how do our actions influence or impact the marine environment? Here's a more concrete visual, right? How can this happen? An overflowing trash can. The wind could blow the trash out. Somebody could miss the trash can. They were trying to throw their trash away. It's too full. And this isn't a rainstorm, but the concept applies here. The debris is caught into the storm drain system and ends up in the natural environment. And a more realistic photo of what does this debris look like in the open water. Now, in this presentation, I'm not going to get into things like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. You could certainly look that up. It's fascinating, but also devastating at the same time. The amount of plastics and refuse that tends to pool together and collect, and we'll see why in a few slides, to almost form an island of plastics and human refuse, human garbage. I could say that in 2017, I was serving aboard the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Tampa, and we were chugging through the Caribbean, far from any island or far from shore. And on lookout duty, I could see a stream of plastic bottles. And there was other types of plastic and styrofoam trash, garbage mixed in with it. It was a very long stream, and it was almost like a line. And you think, wow, we are so far from shore. Who is throwing all of this water into, or who is throwing all of this trash into the water? But again, that's probably non-point source pollution. It likely came from land, kind of like this diagram, and got washed into the ecosystem and then washed out to sea. And an ever-increasing problem along those same lines is the microplastic pollution. So we see this sample of seawater here, right? We see the tiny plastic bits because plastic will break apart. This could influence the types of things you bring into the marine environment. If you've ever had a pool noodle start to disintegrate in your pool with all of these little chunks of plastic styrofoam, you kind of get the idea, right? These materials, they don't break down, they're not biodegrading, but they disintegrate and break into smaller pieces, and these plastics disperse. And many of us have seen different types of charts, and I found an infographic to adapt for this presentation on how long it takes for things to break down. Paper, that breaks down quite quickly. Plastic bags, longer. Aluminum cans, a couple hundred years. And plastic bottles, 450 years or more. And here is why, even in the Caribbean far from shore, I saw from the Coast Guard cutter this long, long, long stream of plastic bottles. Because these gyres, the currents that naturally occur in the ocean, will suck in and transport the marine debris. And this kind of explains the phenomenon of the Pacific garbage patch as well. Right, so the floating debris isn't just floating in a straight line and can easily be collected. It's picked up by the currents, and it rides the current. It rides the patterns of the currents. Now, this is a picture of Mr. Trash Wheel. He's located in Baltimore, Maryland. And Mr. Trash Wheel started off as one trash wheel. Now there's a whole family of them, and they all have different names. But this was the first one, and it was an idea of a way to collect this type of pollution that starts on land but washes into the marine environment. And here's how he works. What you can't see under this canopy is a dumpster, just a regular dumpster. And there's a water wheel here. There's solar panels, and the solar panels will charge up batteries. But this is a creek or a river. It's called the Jones Falls that flows into the Chesapeake Bay. So there is a current here which can turn the water wheel. And when the wheel turns, this is a conveyor belt. These floating booms are set up to prevent the garbage from floating downstream into the Chesapeake Bay estuary. And it flows towards the conveyor belt, and the conveyor belt, turned by the wheel, will dump the garbage into the dumpster. And then a barge, kind of like a trash truck, but on the water, a barge comes to haul the full dumpster away, and it brings a fresh, empty dumpster. But here's what Mr. Trash Wheel looks like on a busy day. Right? We can see how much after one rainstorm. Some is natural, some is wood, but a lot of it's plastic. How much refuse is actually collected after a rainstorm. And if these booms were not there to collect, all of this would, after one storm, end up in the marine environment in the Chesapeake. The trash wheel family has collected about 500 tons of trash and debris from the Inner Harbor in Baltimore. And so there is a kind of a breakdown every year. The organization at Mr. Trash Wheel, I forget if it's .com or .org up there. They do put out an annual report that looks like a spreadsheet, but this infographic just kind of highlights some of the uh, particular items, either the most of something or the most unique items that have been collected by the trash wheel. So here's where safe boating can also help in our mission of caring for our marine resources. Two in particular that may not be thought of often as impacting the environment: running aground and excessive wake impact. So of course we don't want to run aground intentionally. It could damage our boat. It could cause injury. Certainly, if there's damage to the boat, that could cause damage to certain uh, lines, particularly fuel lines. And then, of course, if you have a leak, well, that does directly affect the environment. But there is something else to running aground. Depending on where you're at, it may not be a a sandbar. You might run aground in a sensitive habitat, right? And that running aground, even without boat damage, can cause some serious damage to that local ecosystem, as well as excessive wake impact. So here's an interesting story from Spokane, Washington, Washington State, and it's on Newman Lake. And on Newman Lake, there's this group of people that live around the lake, and they have their homeowners association. And there has been uh, great damage done uh, by the wakes of boats over the years. The erosion to the lake, or the shore, I'm sorry, the shore of the lake, is chiefly attributed to the wakes of the boats not following either no wake zone, exceeding the no wake zone. And over time, those wakes do cause erosion. And there's many other examples, particularly on lakes, of this type of erosion damage. And what you see is the erosion eventually leads to not only the loss of shoreline, but then trees toppling into the water. And, at this point, you're talking actual property damage. One boat with a large wake is on this lake is not causing this type of damage. It's our small decisions, our small actions, and our small practices cumulatively over time. So many of the practices that we learn in any safe boating course are they are absolutely geared towards our safety and the safety of everyone else on the water. But a benefit of that is also, whether we know it or not, they also contribute to the protection of the marine environment and our natural resources. So if you do see something like an oil spill, you see some kind of chemical or a boating accident, we do want to report it, right? So I have the National Response Center hotline posted there, or the NRC Coast Guard site, where you can make a report of something that you see. And if you have the Coast Guard boating app, you can report that way as well. The full Good Mate course details many laws, federal statutes that regulate regulate levels and actions related to clean water, to plastics, to endangered species, oil, air. For this presentation, I just want everyone to be aware that there is a whole legal side as well that is aimed at protecting our living and non-living marine resources. And it might be an area of interest for someone that is thinking about a law career, how they could do their part in a career that they enjoy, a field that they enjoy, to know that there is a legal aspect to this as well. So very basically, there's the Clean Water Act, but if that's something that interests you, there's a topic to explore. So basically, we've talked preventing pollution, respecting wildlife, and safe vessel operation. Onto the community. So things that we can do individually, we should bring others into. And by nature of auxiliary flotillas and Sea Scout ships, we participate in community. So it could be joining in or organizing some sort of cleanup. That might be one of the lowest entry events that makes a huge impact in your local area. I used to show a picture of myself during one of these cleanups, but I thought that I would use this one with Keith Economy and Guy Campbell after one of their auxiliary cleanups along the Potomac River just outside of Fairfax, Virginia. If you are going to do any sort of cleanup, I would highly recommend getting training first. Find an organization that regularly does cleanups, perhaps join their cleanup as training, even though you are helping, and understand what type of PPE and gear that you're going to need to safely do a shoreside cleanup. So I'm going to end tonight's presentation, particularly for any Sea Scouts. How can we use these good mate resources? This was a fairly quick presentation, a lot of different topics. But here's my advice. You can connect it to the living promise. You could use some of this training to help prepare for real world scenarios. If you have a Coast Guard auxiliary flotilla in your area, you could reach out to that flotilla and ask for the Marine Safety Officer and say, I've learned a little bit about Good Mate. We'd like some in-person, on-hands training to prepare for a real world scenario. If your Sea Scout ship is sponsored by an auxiliary unit, this would be a great activity for training. Now, I will say I am not an adult Sea Scout, so this is my doing of trying to connect from the advancement requirements to elements of the Good Mate. So hopefully I did a good job. If I didn't, I'm sure someone will tell me. But there are some connections here for advancement, right? Like demonstrating safe boating practices, understanding environmental regulations, and going a little bit deeper into the pollution aspect of the Good Mate training. Perhaps it's in vessel maintenance. How do we take care of our vessels and improve our vessels, avoiding toxic runoff? And perhaps there are merit badge overlaps. Many of you are more creative than I am. So hopefully with some of the information tonight, it'll give you a starting point that you may be able to apply to advancement. And using that, I tried to think of some kind of practical connection, what it could be and how you would document it. So what could be a training that prepares for a real life scenario? Well, if there is an oil spill kit, and your ship has access to a boat, or you have a boat in your ship and it has an oil spill kit, could you do a practice, a drill, so that everyone knows what the kit is, what's in it, what you would use it for specifically? So those were my practical tips, trying to connect it to, or connect the Good Mate program, maybe in a more concrete way to scouting. So if there are any questions tonight, I'm certainly open to questions. Again, I taught the full Good Mate course. So I do know the course material very well, but I am not a scientist. So some of the aspects of Good Mate, if they're very technical questions about certain types of solvents or something like that, I might be able to answer, but I also might not have that knowledge. Okay. Well, I hope everyone got something out of tonight's presentation on the Good Mate program. And I hope to see you all back here and more on November 18th for our leadership seminar on NAIL, the National Advanced Youth Leadership Experience. See you November 18th and have a good night.